Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome, everybody, to the Just Bernard Show here on freedomslips.com on Revolution Radio. My name is Bernard Alvarez, and we've got another fantastic show for you today. Today is a very special day for those of us in the activist consciousness, spiritual activism world. Today is the day we fight back. If those of you are aware, there is an international movement going on today to either mail, email, call your United States senators, and or if you are living outside of the U.S., to sign a petition to curb. I've got to say that I've seen some, I don't want to say negativity, but cynicism. And don't get me wrong, I'm very cynical when it comes to politics. I'm cynical when it comes to elections. I'm cynical when it comes to the government actually doing anything beneficial for humanity that isn't profitable to them in some way or another. But the reality of it is no matter where you stand, we are bringing awareness to the situation. It is very good to educate the masses on such issues as well. You get 1 million people banging on a senator's door. That senator might just listen. So do what you can. Let's do what we can today as, the day that we fight back. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Today's show is called The State is Out of Date. And again, it goes beautifully with the day that we fight back against surveillance. Our guest today is Gregory Sams. He is the author of the book, The State is Out of Date. Let me tell you a little bit about Gregory. We've had him on the show a couple times. From 1967, Gregory Sams was pioneering natural foods in the UK in partnership with his brother Craig. He opened Seed Macrobiotic Restaurant in Paddington at the age of 19. Sears Grain Store and the Portobello Road soon after, then Harmony Foods, now Whole Earth Foods, in 1970, as well as being closely involved with Harmony Magazine and the Journal of Organic Living. He conceived and launched the original veggie burger in 1982 before the GMOs, adding a word to the language as he opened up the market for vegetarian foods. In 1990, Greg moved out of food and into fractals, founding Strange Attractions, the world's only shop ever dedicated to chaos theory. Trading as Chaos Works, he went on to produce and license fractal images worldwide on everything from posters to book covers to fashion fabrics. This led him to write and publish in 1988 his first book, Uncommon Sense, The State is Out of Date. It was well received, and enjoying his role as an author, Gregory spent the first 7 years of the next millennium writing Son of God, which we've spoken about here on the show in the past. You can check the archives, in which, as he puts it, the biggest elephant in the room that you could ever imagine is unveiled. In 2012-2013, Gregory refreshed, upgraded much of his book, his first book, now republished as The State is Out of Date. We Can Do It Better. The timing was right, and the digital edition hit the internet on October 1st, the day that Uncle Sam shut down for lack of funds. The print edition will be launched in April 2014. So without further ado, let's talk about The State is Out of Date. Welcome back, Gregory Sams. How are you, friend?
I'm great, Bernard. Pleased to be here again.
We're very, very happy to have you back again. Now, again, of course, we have had you on the show several times in the past, and as we mentioned actually before the show, this is a a little bit different than the talks that we've had in the past, which have been more esoteric, more metaphysical, especially with the Son of God book. But you mentioned something, a kind of like an allegory of how the state of out of date pertains to the Son of God. Tell us a little bit of your feeling behind the parallels between the two.
Well, one is temporal, one is spiritual, as you said, but the Son of God really gives us a whole new viewpoint on organized religion, as opposed to spirituality. Of course, spirituality is something, it used to be synonyms. Now people say the biggest, fastest growing religion on the planet is probably I'm spiritual but not religious.
Yeah.
And with the state is out of date, that's really shedding light on the organized state, but also showing us how well we self-govern ourselves wherever we have the opportunity to do it. So, we can have the spirituality of self-government without the organized top-down state telling us how to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you have a wonderful quote here from Graham Hancock, one of the people that many of our listeners enjoy and that I know I enjoy. He says, the state is out of date. We all know it. Now, here is the proof and the roadmap that gets us out of this mess. Was that your intention with this book, to kind of give us a new paradigm of government, or of, I don't want to say ruling, but organization of civic, how shall we say, cities and communities?
Yes, but it's not an ABC, this is how we do this, that, and the other. It is really pointing out that the vast majority of what we rely upon in our lives, we're already governing it. It all came from human beings, from people creating stuff, whether that's ballpoint pens or jumbo jets, whether that's trains or ice popsicles or canals or cars, music, shoes, all this stuff we do ourselves. And the stuff that the government created, you can count on the fingers of one hand, really. Sort of radar, beet sugar was a Napoleonic initiative. There's very little that actually you can say, yes, bless the state for bringing this to our culture. And when you look at it, the things that we're most concerned about are things that the state has got its sticky hand involved in, whether that's healthcare, the environment, the food industry. All of the farmers in America would be losing money if it wasn't for state subsidies. You should really have a situation where farmers produce what people eat, and that's the end of the story. You don't need the government involved. So that's really pointing out that we already govern ourselves. We're well able to set up our own standards of how houses should be built, how cars should be built, when we have that responsibility ourselves. And we've done that through centuries. But the government often takes over and erodes the natural self-governing structures that we've built. There are a couple of actual, specific examples. What do we do about crime and the police? Don't we need police? Well, yeah, we do need police, but we need a system where the police don't thrive on crime. We need a system where the police do well out of getting rid of crime. And we see that happening already, where it's unregulated, where the government isn't involved on the internet, other than sucking all the data out of it, illegally. Right. You have these large corporations online who deal with bad suppliers, bad customers, rotten eggs, without putting them in prison, without having police smashing their doors down in the early morning. They just shunt them out of the system. End of story. Yeah. Without using coercive techniques. And that's really what the book is about. It's showing us how we can do this without having a nuclear umbrella over our heads and this huge governmental structure where I think 1 in 4 people in America are employed in the security industry, most of them by the government.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's really the message. We can do it better if we have the chance and the responsibility given back to us.
You know, I can't help but think of the situation that I'm seeing right now, and I feel that when we relate to it on an individual level, we can see the insanity of what the government has done. Right now, I live in a historic district in Roanoke, Virginia. The homes here are 150 years old, and of course, there's all that paperwork involved, and there are situations, especially right now with the winter, where pipes are bursting, and there are homes, apartment complexes, dozens of people that have had to leave their home, either staying on friends' couches or staying with family or whatnot, and can't get into their home because they need a permit to cut a hole in the wall to fix the pipe. Okay.
Oh my God. Oh, it's just
And it has to be replaced and done just so right and within the guidelines of the historical structure and the right color and the right nails and the right, putty and the right pipe and it has become so expensive for many of these homeowners that we're seeing gorgeous, $200 manors, with beautiful southern columns just falling into decay because they can't afford a permit to change the front door. So,
Yes.
I'd like to think about it as if things went the way that you said, that, the community would say, no, you cannot do that. We don't need to have that. We don't necessarily need to have it look exactly like it did. But I mean, don't turn it into a modern condominium. You know what I'm saying? I think because I
Yeah.
feel that condo commando mentality, it's a big part of that mentality of trying to govern every aspect of our lives.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many things that are important to our lives that we do self-govern. And when we hand that responsibility over to government because we think this is so important, the state has to run it, it inevitably deteriorates. And one of the reasons that I put in the book for this, and one of the explanations for this, is that when you're stopping Hitler or Genghis Khan, or let's say the Mexicans want to invade the USA militarily, you need coercive tools. You need guns. You need to threaten them. Say, you do this, we're going to bomb you. We're going to make you really regret that you did it. That works there. But when you're managing building permits, health, what food people eat, what drugs they take, this isn't the tool that works. There's a very limited tool. Do this or I'm going to damage you, or don't do this or I'm going to damage you. You don't get the long-term, usually short-term even, you don't get the results that you're looking for. So here where you're living, they want to preserve the houses. What do they end up doing? Letting them collapse. I mean, in the European Union, we had people quite rightly saying we have to do something about overfishing. The fish are dangerous, in danger of extinction or over depletion in the oceans. So the European Union comes up with a system. I don't know if you ever got coverage in the USA, but all your commercial fishermen were dumping half of the fish that they caught back in the ocean dead.
Oh, Lord.
Because they weren't allowed in their quota system. You can't really tell the fish, okay, we only want cod and halibut swimming into our nets. But everything else that swam in had to be thrown back dead. And if many cod swam into their nets, those were thrown back dead. And it's, they come up with these, this is what you have to do. Oh, shit. Sorry, I've got.
That's okay.
Unplugged here. Okay. That will stop in a second. I thought I unplugged that. Okay, we're off on that now. So yeah, you don't get the results that you want when when coercion is your only tool.
I can't imagine how I mean, how much waste is going on, and we see that here as well. With when it comes to trapping lobster or something like that, we have strict lobster laws. You can only have so many pounds during lobster season or whatever, and like you said, they all get dumped back, and it makes absolutely no sense. and really is it's more damaging than helpful.
It certainly is. And but again, that's the only way the government works. And of course, most of them are lawyers. Most of your congressmen, senators over here, members of parliament, are lawyers. And lawyers are born and bred conflict. It's not, they don't look for cooperative situations. You either win or you lose your case. You don't come to an agreement that everybody's happy with.
You reminded me, I saw something when I was living in South Florida. And actually, I was living in one of these condo areas where there's all the towers on the beach, of course, And there were bumper stickers everywhere somebody had put up, and it said, "If you want to see the water again, stop voting for lawyers."
That's great.
Wonderful. Now, let's talk about the first chapter in your book, because I've had my eye on this since the beginning of our talk here, and I just love this concept and this idea of what would an alien think. Tell us a little bit about that chapter and why you named it, What Would an Alien Think?
Well, it's just to start off by giving us a different viewpoint on our civilization, because if you've ever been to one of these movies that deal with extraterrestrials, they've always got these sort of space commanders and fancy phaser bolts and all these sort of, we lay our structure of government onto them and assume that they've got this top-down control and huge arsenals of high-tech weaponry. And that's just fundamentally unsound, because, the ability to kill loads of people very quickly with weapons of mass destruction, of which America is the major holder of in the world, is not a sign of a highly advanced civilization. Being able to kill loads of people, that's not advanced. And that doesn't give you a sustainable type of system where you're going to go for centuries and millennia and be able to develop space travel and things like that. We don't need that top-down state structure and military arsenals in order to build railways and airplanes and smartphones and all the things that enable us to live happy, civilized, connected lives. And it's, I just want to get that out of our heads, because an alien coming to planet Earth would probably be terrified of what might happen to him if he was outed or recognized for what he was. What would the American government, you think they'd sort of let him out, or would he be locked up and studied and examined? An alien would be horrified at the weaponry we have. They probably might be able to outmaneuver a fighter jet, but they've probably got nothing in their culture that's the equivalent of nuclear weapons, because they never thought to create something so horrifically destructive and damaging on their own. So it's just sort of put a different hat on, and what would this peace-loving alien think coming to Earth and seeing what we do here?
A culture that would be extremely advanced compared to ours. I can't help but make a connection here with what you said, how we superimpose this hierarchical control. A few years back, all over the internet was this wave of the Galactic Federation of Light, and you would see all these channelers saying, "Oh, from the Great Commander, Light Purple, whatever." They met and they decided that this and that, and I was like, they're creating government in the cosmos, these channelers,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, I really wouldn't think I'd want to be a part of anything like that. If they're that advanced, I can't help but not want to be a part of that.
Right.
That's crazy. But it is true. My first chapter, my book is coming out actually. We're on the same line here. I redid my book recently, and it's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks. And the first chapter is that it's the idea of an entity coming back to the planet and looking at the planet and saying, what is wrong with these people? They have so many control mechanisms. They're controlled in every movement. Why do they need this control? Yeah. And it's a way of looking that, we've allowed an external control mechanism to rule basically almost every one of our movements, everything from government to the internet to traffic to our food even.
Mm-hmm. And we're supposedly the most advanced, intelligent animal on the planet, and yet we're the only one that needs a piece of paper to cross these imaginary lines on the map that are borders between one country and another. It's, aside from domesticated animals, it's crazy the restrictions we have, and that's a major one. These lines on the map.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually had a fan post on our page today of the Earth. You've probably seen the picture. It's a picture of the Earth.
Yeah.
It says, "I don't see any lines." Do
That's
you?
right. I think I've seen that. Yeah.
And it's so funny though, and it's very strange how conditioned we are to defend those lines. I'm sure of course, John Lennon. Imagine a world without any borders. And people get so angry of how dare we, we have to defend our borders,
I know. I knew John Lennon quite well.
Yes, I know you did. That's why I bring it up.
But yeah, it's partly it's tradition, when people have lived with something for a few generations, they think, well, that's the way it is. That's the way it's always been, and heaven forbid what would happen if we change that. And there's another factor. There is the real factor of, people coming into your country and taking advantage of all the quotes unquote free things you get from the government. And I've been paying my taxes to pay for housing or health care or whatever the support structure is. And I don't want a bunch of people coming in who haven't been contributing to that, sucking at the same polluted breast. That's, yes, as the way things are, that's the way people think. And, the government likes us to be dependent upon them. And this is one of the results. We depend on the state to provide this, that, and the other. And we give up a lot of our freedoms in the meantime. And it's not an instant overnight solution, but I make the point in the book that if we had the 50 to 60% of our wealth, our annually created wealth, in our pockets, like for every $1, you've got $2 in your pockets instead. We're not going to have so many things that we need, so many safety nets that we need the government to cover.
Right.
I mean, even with those safety nets, you still got lots of people living rough under, highway flyovers and things in America and in the UK.
We're coming up on a break, Gregory.
Okay,
we're going to
good.
continue this discussion when we return after this short commercial break.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Today's show is The State is Out of Date with Gregory Sams. We are doing this broadcast in solidarity with the day we fight back against surveillance. If you would like to participate in today's activist action that is happening globally, you can go to our website at the GIC.org. There will be a banner there of which you can put in your email address and send a letter to your representative, congressman, senator, etc., and or you can call them yourself and leave a message. If you are not in the United States, you can click on Not a U.S. Citizen and sign a global petition to curtail global surveillance. This is a really big day, and we're very happy that we have this show today. The State is Out of Date with Gregory Sams. Before we went on the break, we were talking a little bit about borders and why people are so afraid, and it's understandable. And Gregory was saying that we're paying taxes, and people might get some of the benefits that the state might be offering us. But I feel that, and Gregory, I wonder what your thoughts are. Is it a long-term goal for us to get rid of the borders as we implement a new way of governing ourselves?
Yes, as a long-term goal, certainly. And I think whilst we say, well, what would we do without the government doing this or that, we also have to recognize that throughout history, every government, every empire eventually does fail and collapse as they get bigger and bigger, have more and more regulations, more and more bureaus and bureaucrats that need supporting. Eventually, the host that they're living upon can't support them anymore, and that's happened in the Soviet Union. It happened to the Roman Empire. You know, all of these people, they think we're going to go on forever. They never realize that they're going to eventually collapse, but they do. And as we approach that, we'll see our services reducing and reducing as they're not able to provide them because they haven't got the money to pay themselves to interfere with our lives or to give us stuff. And we'll really need to develop our own ways of dealing with this, rather than, as many people do think, well, what we need is somebody new in command with new ideas, telling us things that we have to do that are more inspired. I.e., that's what anybody who's thinking that thinks we should be doing. It's the if I ruled the world syndrome, and this is what happened to the great people of Egypt. They rose up, they overthrew their state, and but then it's like, okay, well, let's put another state in there, and they had a choice between fundamentalist Islam or heavy-handed, hard-booted military, and then ended up with the military. They're not happy. I've got Egyptian friends, and they're not happy with this situation after having fought so valiantly to get rid of the state. And when those situations arise, my dream is that more people will be ready to actually look for human-based alternatives, internet-based alternatives. And we have, the internet is just fantastic because we are able to connect and form networks and work together. And that's what creates self-government. And we're more able to we have done it in the past. If you look at recorded history, we have cities cities with thousands of people living in them, trading with other cities, producing art, producing trade and culture, for thousands of years before we have any evidence of chariots, soldiers, commanders, wars, spears, and all of that stuff. You don't find evidence going back beyond 2500, 2600 BCE of that going on, but we do have civilization. And that date, 2600 BCE, that's when it began. Yeah. It took centuries and millennia for it to spread to Rome, to England, to North America. And people, and even if you go into medieval times, you go to Florence in the 14th century, Florence was the driving engine of the Renaissance in Europe. And it didn't have, for most of a couple of centuries, it didn't have kings, princes, or rulers top down telling it what to do. It was organized from the bottom up in what was called peasants' communes, that peasants were architects, jewelers, farmers, engineers. They just weren't titled, so they were peasants. But businesses had trade guilds, so the business guild would set standards and make sure you didn't have that bad architects in there who cheated their way through university, right. But had a certificate. It was self-governed. They had a population of 90,000. They had 8,000 children, boys and girls, in schools, in education, primary education. They had another 800 in higher education at 4 universities. They had 30 hospitals with an overall bed to population ratio similar to what we have in Germany today. So, we can do this. And with the extra connectivity of the internet, we can do as good or better job than they did in Florence when they didn't even have telephones to communicate with.
Absolutely. I can't help but point out you're giving us wonderful examples of past historical happenings that to me sound what we call like a modern day co-op. I think it's a wonderful thing. The only thing that people seem to not realize is the way things are right now has been going on just as long. You have a wonderful quote here on your website from the state is out of date. The budget should be balanced. Public debt should be reduced. The arrogance of officialdom should be tempered. And assistance to foreign lands should be curtailed. What year was this? 63 BC. This
I love that quote.
Not changed. It has been going on for centuries. People believe, oh, it's only been 50 years. It's only been 100 years. It's been thousands of years. This ridiculousness has been going on. And I wonder if you can touch on some of that. How much has really changed besides the fact that now we have internet and technology as far as government is concerned?
Well, the organized state, the main thing is it's gotten an awful lot bigger than it ever used to do. I mean, the basic raison d'etre of the state, when you get down to it, is to protect us from other versions of themselves, to stop Hitler from taking over Europe. The little states around the world tried to stop the Roman Empire from taking them over. But that's what they're good at. And once they overextend that reach, whether it's in Rome in 63 BC or in the USA or UK today, that's when things start to go downhill, when they say, okay, we're going to get involved in all sorts of other stuff. And when it was just a king and his soldiers and his cousins and brothers sucking money out of the rest of the population, it wasn't that huge a load. I mean, taxation, if you go back several centuries, you will find that it varied overall taxation between 2 and 10%.
Wow.
And that was, went up to 10% during the Napoleonic Wars. It went up during the First World War. You never used to have standing armies. If you had a war, you would raise the money, fight the war, and then the taxes would go back down again, and you disband the soldiers. Now we have this sort of huge top-heavy structure, and with democracy, you have so many more different people involved in telling us what to do. Mm-hmm. And the overall taxation, when you add in import duties, employment taxes, and over here we have airplane ticket tax when you buy insurance, and of course there's taxation on tobacco, alcohol, gasoline. When you add them all up, it's getting close to 60% of our money has been taken out to feed this particular beast. And that really is the fundamental reason why we have so much problems with poverty, homelessness, poor, not enough food to eat. And it's and the government says, well, we need more money to deal with these problems that we have created. And they're just constantly lobbying for new taxes, and people go along with it. Okay, yeah, tax the rich, tax gasoline more, tax this, tax that. And it's just don't tax. Let us have our money, because we're much better at spending it than the government is.
And I can't help but notice it never really comes back to the people. There's a very good example in history of this in the state of Florida. I believe it was back in the 80s. They started the lottery to help pay for education. None of that money went back to the education.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who's getting it, but, they're still suffering. The teachers are still quitting. They're breaking up the teachers' unions. People are losing their jobs. And I think Florida is one of the worst educational, states. You mentioned something, and I can't help. There's a little, I guess, a conundrum that happens, because there is the one idea of free market. We'll just use the modern term, free market, like Google not being regulated or Monsanto not being regulated or whatnot. And the reality of it is that a lot of these giant megacorps are influencing government policy. Now, what do we do in the sense of if we are, because I consider myself a libertarian socialist, for lack of a better term. I believe in small government. I believe in a deregulation of many things. However, my concern is, let's say, like Walmart, they'll make laws that say you have to buy our corn, or you'll have to buy the Monsanto corn that we sell. What would be a way that we could update these type of policies in order to allow a corporation like that to thrive, but yet without allowing it to cause harm to the general public?
Well, first of all, those corporations need the coercive mechanism in place in order to force us to use their products or enable to force the competition out of business. Pharmaceutical companies cannot force you to have your children vaccinated, banging on your door. They need the government to do that, to pass regulations, social services, take your kids into care. Monsanto could not could not sell genetically modified seeds or food without the government putting a seal of approval on them, because no insurance company will cover that for them. Right. And if any business, however big you are or small you are, well, sometimes really small ones don't, but if you're a big business, you have to have insurance, just like you have to have computers and telephones to do business. It's de rigueur. No insurance company in the world would cover a nuclear power plant. There wouldn't be one nuclear power plant in the world without the states supporting them. And I like the term free enterprise. Free enterprise, capitalism, they are synonyms. But capitalism is really go for the money, make money at all expense. And there's a kind of headset that goes along with that word. Yeah. Whereas free enterprise is just the ability for human beings to interact with each other without this top-down regulation. We can have our bottom-up regulations, guilds, societies, co-ops, and things like that. And that's where, some kids selling lemonade on the front lawn or selling cakes in a church bake sale, they're getting busted these days because you might endanger the consumer. And you end up with a situation where these consumer protection so-called laws are in place, many of them dictated by big industry lobbyists, where all you end up with is people selling burgers, fried chicken, all this kind of, you have to be fairly big to comply with all the regulations that are involved. So you get these massive corporations building up without competition because it's so hard to compete when you're faced with all the regulations that they are happy to comply with because they can hire somebody to do it all.
Right. I got to jump in right now and give you an example of exactly what you're talking about. We have a fairly large neo-pagan culture here in Roanoke, Virginia. And every year there's a large pagan festival, and there is only one food vendor, and that food vendor is Little Caesar's Pizza.
Right. A Little Caesar.
And now, granted, it is an independently owned booth, but the city only allows them to sell pre-made food that was, okayed by the city, which is Little Caesar's Pizza. And you would think that the pagan community would want to have like GMO-free corn on the cob or GMO-free pork or something like that.
Yeah.
No, they're selling Little Caesar's Pizza, unfortunately, because of the regulations. It's
so bizarre. We don't need all those regulations. I used to run a big natural food company, and we would buy packaging equipment to put beans in bags, simple stuff like that. And it would come in and you couldn't operate it because of these sort of safety devices being put up on it. And the people who sold it to you told, well, you've got to remove those if you want to get it to operate. And that was decades ago. And it just gets worse and worse. And I just, if we all ate with our fingers or with spoons, and somebody came along and said, hey, I've got this new idea, this object, and it's got 4 pointed edges on it, and you stick that in the food to pick it up and stick this into your mouth, they'd never, fork, you would never get by the health and safety regulations. I mean, how dangerous is that, sticking a sharp 4-pointed object in your mouth dozens of times a day? But we managed somehow on that.
Yeah.
And it's, that's just going on from there.
Well, you say it, you talk about it in your chapter called Legitimizing Coercion, how we've basically given our rule of law over to corporate lobbyists, and how we've just, as a society, we feel that, oh, they're saving us, they're protecting us, just like the lemonade stand that we talked about, and it's really gotten to a state. Well, let me be a little smart butt here and say the state is out of date.
Yeah. Hey, that's the title of my book.
Yes, exactly. Now, what are some things? Is there any hope in? And we've only got about 4 minutes left in this segment, but in these last 4 minutes, is there any hope in reversing the way things are, the way that the state is run? So many people, a great example are political activists. I don't consider myself a political activist. I consider myself more of a spiritual activist dealing with issues. But we have political activists that are trying to get certain things legislated and whatnot. Is that going to work, or do we need to really just look for something different completely?
Yeah, well, I call myself a political deactivist.
There we go.
And I've sometimes said that, putting my book in the politics section of a bookshop would be like putting a book on fasting in the cookery section. And you talked about being cynical early on. Well, I'm beyond being cynical. Cynical implies that it could work, but they've got dubious motives. I don't really think there is. It's not a question of putting the right people in, because you put the right people in who think like you do, and the only tools they've got are do this or I'm going to damage you. Yeah. And that's not really the way things work. And we see from the wonderful freeness of the internet that is huge. It's bigger than many nations. I don't know how you size the internet, but there's no coercion on there. There's nobody saying, do this or I'm going to damage you, or don't do this or I'm going to damage you. It works without that, and that's one of the reasons it works so beautifully and smoothly, and how it evolves to meet the needs of our society.
Exactly. Now, we do have something like that, but it's toward the state, and that's called anonymous.
Right.
They coerce the government websites. But that's a good thing. I can't help but I agree with you. I feel that, I recently posted a meme talking about this, about turning our back on government, turning our back on organized religion. And it's just amazing how many people defended the current state of government, the current state of organized religion. And, you have to wonder how many people will it take? What do they call it? The 12th monkey thing?
Yeah.
What's it going to take to really help these philosophies to be ingrained in the people of the world? So many are just still looking for that quick buck. I get people from Africa thinking that I'm the Illuminati because I have the word illumination. They're like, I want to be rich. I'll do anything. It's like, no. You're writing the wrong person here. But it seems to be a state of desperation, perhaps. And I feel that has a lot to do with the fact that the government has made so many people so desperate.
Well, there is. I mean, I've obviously had my finger on this pulse for some time. It was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
The first incarnation of this book came out.
We have about 25 seconds, Gregory.
Okay. And the veil has dropped. So many people now recognize that the state does not have our best interests at hand. And that's a huge awareness that is new to the population.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we like to call it the awakening, and I think that's really what is happening. We're getting ready to go on a break here. When we return, I can't even cover 1/3 of this book in the time that we have, but we're going to cover some topics right back.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I am sitting here talking with Gregory Sams, and we are discussing his new book, The State is Out of Date, on this very special day, the day we fight back against surveillance. If you would like to learn more about the action, the day we fight back against surveillance, you can go to my website, thegic.org. There is a banner there that will give you some actions that you can do to let your voice be heard, to lower and curtail the state of surveillance. With that being said, let's welcome back Gregory Sams to today's show. Gregory, my next question I want to bring in, and this is a controversial topic, but I see that you brought it up in your book, and that's voting. The idea of living in a society where the majority rules. And philosophically, I've always had a problem with that. You know, what if you were dealing with a majority of pedophiles?
Right.
You know, what if you were dealing with a majority of psychopaths? You know, so how do we? Well, perhaps maybe I should ask you is to share a little bit of where we're at today and where we can go from here.
Well, as you say, the idea that the majority are right is got no real basic foundation to it. And even if you do say, yeah, the majority should, some things affect everybody, and it's not a question of whether you can have sex with children or whether you have homosexuality legal or illegal. It's other more general things like where does a road go? But the majority doesn't actually even make the decision, because when you subtract all the people who are not old enough or too old to vote, or the people who aren't allowed to vote for one reason or the other, and the people who don't give a damn and don't vote, you often end up with 25% of the population constituting the majority voting for one party or the other. And even then, those 25%, a lot of them aren't even voting for one person or party. They're voting against the other one. They're choosing the lesser, what they perceive as the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
And as Tolstoy famously said in a similar situation, don't ask me to choose between cat shit and dog shit. I don't want either of them on my plate.
Yeah.
So there are other ways of doing things. We don't have to vote over what size our ballpoint pens should be, or how many gigabytes we can store on our cell phones, or what size our computers are, or what size our packet of spaghetti is in the shop. I mean, these are things that we self-govern and we do really well. And the whole voting thing, where voting or the majority will is relevant, we exercise that naturally. We don't have to vote about what you wear to the supermarket. You know, can you wear your bikini into a supermarket, or your underpants? There's no law against it, but people don't do it. It's really just another way of choosing who gets into power. In Egyptian times, you know, the pharaohs were divine, so God chose them to be it. You have, you know, where we're ruled by military juntas, it's the most powerful military. You had the church running things when the Vatican ran most of Europe. And they're all different ways to decide who's wielding that coercive bat and telling us what to do. And voting is one of them. Winston Churchill, as he pointed out, he said democracy is the worst form of government imaginable, except for all the other types we've tried before. So it gives us an opportunity to, you were talking about change right at the beginning, your technical assistant on this program, talking about, it was the mayor of the city he's living in and saying, we're going to bring change. Well, what you change is the packaging. You still have to buy into the product, whether you like it or not. And, as long as it's not really a big change in how we do things. And of course, with electronic voting boxes and the manipulation of the media, it's not necessarily always our choice anyway that gets through to the final position.
And I can't help but feel the reality of it is that those 25% that are voting are being manipulated for a vote, whether it be through the hate campaigns or the digging up dirt against one another. It's really difficult to really get behind a particular candidate in today's day, whether it be in the U.S. or in the U.K. or in Europe or not. The reality of it is that most of the people that are running are long-term career politicians that have always done something to benefit themselves and not their constituents.
Yeah. I mean, their own self-interests are primary, and the most important thing to any politician is staying in power. And they will say the right things to stay in power. You had so many, quite a few people got into power in America and England talking about less government. We're going to reduce government. They don't reduce government. Taxes go up and up and up. And we keep sort of falling. We keep being suckered by people telling us what we want to hear. Like, I'm going to close down Guantanamo. First thing I'm going to do. I mean, they have no obligation to keep their promises. Whereas if you order a new set of furniture from IKEA and they don't deliver it, well, you go and you get your money back.
Right, exactly.
In the real world, people have to deliver what they promise when you give them what they want, which in politics is your vote. But politics, they don't. And it's, again, people keep thinking somebody's going to do it. And now in Europe, some countries, the fascists are gaining in popularity. People say, we need a change. We need a big change. Let's vote in the fascists because they're, because in America and in England, the two parties, you could barely squeeze a piece of paper between their policies. Yeah. But, fascists, you say, okay, we're going to ban this and kill these people and do that. Okay, that's different. And people, or, communists or, people say, okay, that's really different. We'll go for that. Well, it's not. It's the same damn thing.
It sure is. It certainly is. And it saddens me that it's come to this. But I will say on the good, as far as a piece of good news, being that things have gotten so, like you said, generic or I don't want to say out of control, but out of date. Mm-hmm. People are now, like we spoke about earlier, are now waking up to the idea that this is just not working anymore, and hopefully they'll see beyond the idea of fascism or something like that. I mean, I'm one of these people back, 7-8 years ago, and still to an extent today, that lean libertarian because of the fact that it's different, it's third party. But unfortunately, the reality of it is I don't agree with a lot of it as well. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, I can lean toward that and I would vote for that because the Republicans and the Democrats here in the U.S. are so out of control. I would like to put something else in power. Maybe once the libertarians come in power, they will change the way they do things. And that's not realistic, Somebody said, I think it was Maya Angelou that says, when somebody tells you who they are, listen. You know, and you know the libertarians don't want any control. They don't want gun control. They don't want health insurance. They don't want Social Security. They don't support women's rights. I'm like, well, then I have a problem with that. You know. But you know, if we want to talk about parties, I wish there was a true libertarian party here. I don't know how different it is in the UK or in Europe, but I know from the well, only through Noam Chomsky, I will say that American libertarianism is very conservative compared to the true idea of socialist libertarianism, which is where we do see the government providing health care, providing education, providing, you know, the certain necessities of a culture, but without infringing on people's personal rights.
Yeah, see, I absolutely do not go with the government getting involved in healthcare or various other things. It's because when they do, they become dominated by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
And even when they're not involved in it, the pharmaceutical industry, by passing legislation, has dominated the American Medical Association. They sort of work hand in hand to feather their own beds. And in England, or Great Britain, if you go back to the early 19th century, right up from the early 1800s to 1911, you had the development of friendly societies. There was probably something similar in America. And friendly societies were workers who got together. There were like 10 or 20,000 of them throughout the country. And different societies, registered and some of them unregistered, where workers would put a few dollars or pounds into the pot. It would have been pence in those days, out of their salary every week, and this would provide them with medical care. If they put in more, they would get higher levels of cover. People would come around to check how their family were doing because it was, you know, people doing this. It was their system. Because it was their system, they didn't kind of go into the doctor and get fake sick notes so they could, or injury work, so they could get benefits while they were out of work. It was their system. And then in 1911, through lobbying by the doctors and insurance companies, established insurance companies, the government came out with something called the National Insurance Bill, which forced people to pay some of their money into a different system. And that eventually evolved and mutated after about 30 years into the National Health Service that the UK has now. In the course of this, well, early on, soon after 1911, doctors' wages doubled. And slowly these wonderful human-built institutions completely disappeared from the scene instead of evolving. And there were also institutions people set up to deal with poverty, to deal with homeless mothers. And this was all going on towards the end of the 19th century in Europe and in America.
Oh, wow.
And we kind of forget about those things. And they never had a chance to evolve. At that time, the only way we could communicate was with letters and telegraph. These, telegraph cables laid across the Atlantic. Well, look at how that has evolved. How many ways we can communicate now. And yet they didn't get a chance to evolve. And we tend to look back and think, oh, it was very primitive in the 19th century. Look what we've got now. Well, it didn't evolve from the 19th century because that evolution would stop. Where we did evolve, we've got wonderful systems that really serve our needs in a sustainable and effective and flexible manner. With the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, it's coming under increasing attack by people who, complaining about the poor service they get, the lack of command, but it is completely controlled by the pharmaceutical industries. There are dozens of so-called patients organizations, all of which are funded by pharmaceutical companies. And they have often run by the pharmaceutical companies. It's their front to change the laws. In America, for every single member of Congress and the Senate, for every one member you have representative, you have 3 lobbyists from the pharmaceutical industry telling them what's best for the health of America.
Yeah.
And you have all sorts of regulations against herbal practitioners. If you want to touch somebody in a healing manner in California, you have to have a certificate to do it.
Yeah.
Which is why Reiki is so popular.
Yes,
Reiki.
yeah.
And that's just a crazy state of affairs that you have to be licensed and have permits to engage in what's called free enterprise. And that's why the big corporations get in control of it. And that's why healthcare is so damned expensive. I spent 10 years spending my winters in India, where there's no healthcare system, but where doctors get paid, they get better paid than the rest of the population, but they're not getting hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And somebody can go to the doctor for the equivalent of 10 or 20 bucks.
Wow.
And not be skinned alive. And people don't go to the doctor for frivolous reasons. But if they do need something, they can scrape the money together to do it and get some treatment. And also you have alternative forms of, they can go to Ayurvedic doctors, or you can try all sorts of different techniques. In England, I don't know if they're in America, we have these Chinese herbalists, and they've set up all over the country, practicing herbal medicine, because herbal medicine is powerful. Most of the major drugs we have today were derived from herbs.
Absolutely.
And these Chinese herb doctors, they charge, none of it's free, all of it's charged, but it's well affordable. And they're doing really well, even though their competition is offering a free, so-called free service, the NHS. So it's, we can do it better. And I don't really, you're talking about women's rights, legislating women's rights. I don't agree with that. We've had legislation has now made it illegal to be prejudiced against homosexuality. Fine. I'm all for homosexual, people with whatever sexual tendencies they like being accepted as part of society. And that is the way society was going anyway, which is why people lobbied to have laws making it mandatory. So you couldn't have, one or two homophobic people out there. But it's the way society is going. And we have to remember that it was not that long ago at all. One generation ago, this same government was putting homosexuals in jail.
Yeah.
And we certainly don't need that. And that's one of the reasons it's taken so long for sexual preferences to be, a natural part of who you are. And with women's rights, I think the same way. It's for society. And again, here's where a majority voting works. If most people are easy about people's sexual tendencies or about, women's rights, that's how we advance as a society, not by making it mandatory. And in England now, you've got your speech. People go to jail because they use the word or call people, use offensive language like that has been made illegal. Well, I want to know who the bigots are. I don't want them having to hide because it's illegal to come out as a bigot.
That's a very good point. And, I have to agree with you. And I do agree with you with everything that you're talking about in my heart. Maybe politically, I would like to see discrimination made illegal or whatnot. But when it comes to coming from the heart, and I think that's the big disconnect that society has. When we are living from the heart, when we are living in compassion, when we are living to allow ourselves to be who we truly are and not necessarily rely on a government to tell us who we truly are, then we can evolve as a society. The reality of it is that, you have this, it's a distraction. When you were talking about legislating against, homosexual discrimination, I call that giving the masses a crumb while they take the cake. It's like, oh yeah, we'll appease the pro-gay rights people, but we're going to take away your rights in every other aspect. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they'll throw you a crumb just to appease you. But in the meantime, they're still bombing children and, killing everybody and creating wars and allowing GMOs. But, the gays will have some rights.
Right, right. But again, I think that stuff is down to society and to people. And there was a big case in England where an elderly couple who had their prejudices and their the way they lived, had a bed and breakfast where they let out a couple rooms to people, and they didn't want to let out to let their room to a gay couple. For them, the thought of two men having sex in the bedroom in their house was just anathema. And they were taken to court on that. And, I don't know whether they ended up closing their bed and breakfast or complying. But, I think, even though I don't agree with them at all, I think that is down to people. And, I mean, if I opened up a restaurant and I said, okay, no redheads or women are allowed in this restaurant, I think I've got the right to do that, but I also don't think I do very well. I think a hell of a lot of people would say, no, screw you, mate. We're not coming to your restaurant.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's how the majority votes, with their pockets, with their feelings.
And that's the whole concept of being self-governing, is to really to act with not only your pocket, but with what you're paying attention to. I find that, this whole idea of, just like what you're talking about, Greg, the idea of, turning, a good example is we have this duck thing. What is that? I don't even know what the show is. Some duck hunting show, and the guy turns out to be a bigot. And it's like, well, you know what? He has a right to be a bigot. We have a right not to pay attention to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, be a bigot. You know what? Well, your ratings will decline because you're a bigot. And yeah, his ratings have gone down like 50% or something in the last month or whatever. And But the whole thing that I got out of this was I never even heard of that dumb show. And now I have, and so has half of America. And I'm sure that out of curiosity, many people had to tune in to say, oh, well, what's this all about? And we're actually giving them more attention by marketing their bigotry.
Yeah.
And again, if you are going to legislate it, it's giving more power to the government and taking it away from yourself.
And you've also got the police force going out and busting people for bigotry rather than for stealing, mugging, killing. There's a lot of real crime out there that isn't being addressed, that, where you need somebody to intervene and do something. And a lot of attention is being spread onto victimless crimes. Now, maybe bigotry, it's sort of borderline whether it's victimless or not, but I'm in a wheelchair. I've been in a wheelchair since I was 19. And I often have people coming up and treating me as if I'm some dumb, helpless cripple, and asking people I'm with, how does he like his tea, or what is, right. Thinking I can't even speak for myself. I mean, I've run quite a few large businesses in my life. I'm independent, but people have this association with the poor, stupid cripple who can't do a thing for himself. And that's their problem. That's not my problem.
Yep.
And I'm polite to them. I don't say, you fucking bigot, get out of my life, because they're people. That's the way they feel. But, that's not my problem. It's their problem. And if I'm black and somebody calls me, that's their problem, not mine. And I don't want to get, have my blood raised and my adrenaline going because somebody is that stupid. If they're going to tell me, okay, you're not allowed in on these buses, then okay, that's different.
Yeah, I was going to say there would have to be a line drawn somewhere because I live in Virginia, and you know the story of the South when it comes to bigotry and racism.
Yeah, yeah.
And if it were to the point where, you know, a gay man or a black man couldn't go into a restaurant or go walk down the street safely, I would definitely have to have a problem with that. So, I mean, you know, where's the line? Is it where it affects our freedom? Is that when we have to legislate? Or I mean, where do we say, you know, enough is enough? I have the right to see my gay partner in the hospital who's terminal. You know, but that hospital says, no, I don't. Would we have to
Yeah.
legislate that?
Um,
In today's world, maybe
yeah,
not in the future.
maybe not in the future, and maybe not if we waited 10 years for some problems to dissolve of their own accord. You know, maybe if it took a little bit longer for the movement of social ideas and social change to alter a situation. And it's again, I make the point, it was not long ago that the government put homosexuals in jail,
Yeah.
and now they put you in jail if you are anti-homosexual. And I think we could have gotten to the point where people's sexual preferences were not a problem wherever you were, without having to legislate that.
Right. Or not even an issue.
Yeah, not even an issue.
And you
Right?
know, I will say you're right because it does create a certain divisiveness. And of course, you know, divide and control is one of the wonderful ways and methods they use to rule
Mm-hmm.
us.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, it does become a left wing, right wing a scenario instead of a social awareness campaign, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
But and speaking of that, actually, geez, we've only got about 2 more minutes left on this segment, so I don't want to go too much into
Okay.
something new. But I do want to touch on this whole idea of in your book called "Birthright Denied," and that's something I've had an issue with since I was a kid. I remember being a child and saying, you know, well, one of these days I just want to go move to the woods and you know, build a house. And I didn't even know the term living off the grid back then.
Yeah.
And now it's become illegal to live off the grid. I mean, you really can't go and buy a piece of land in wilderness without having to submit to permits and all these other government implemented ways of you know complying.
Yeah, well, you've got to have a flush toilet and power lines, or civilization is going to collapse around us.
Exactly.
You know?
And a smart meter nowadays.
A smart. I know. I'm trying to stop them putting those in my house.
Yeah, they're coming. They're coming. Anyway, we're going to take a break in just a
Okay.
few seconds, but when we return, we are going to cover this idea of what has happened to us. I mean, we really can go nowhere on the planet where the land is not owned and has certain restrictions for us to do as we feel. I know that maybe out in the ocean you can, but even there, I'm sure there's international law that pertains to something you can or cannot do without hurting other people, of course. We'll be right back.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Welcome back to the justBernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are having a really great conversation today with Gregory Sams on the concept and his book, The State is Out of Date. Before we went on the break, we were just touching on a subject of our birthright denied. And I see that we're having a great topic discussion here in the chat, so I wanted to go on with this. Gregory, let's talk about this idea that, you know, we have no right to live off the land, that we have, you know, the idea of living away from society has basically become illegal in many places around the world. What's going on with that, and what is there any way we can change it at this point?
I certainly hope so. When the controls are lifted a bit, because there's still a lot more land than there are people, and it's. You think just about, again, outside of domesticated animals, every living thing on this planet, from a worm to a redwood tree, has the it lives off the land, and we can. I mean, I've got nothing against houses and air conditioning, and I don't like air conditioning, but nothing against all the sort of lovely trappings of civilization we have. But if you say, no, I just want to be a human being and live in a tent or a teepee or in my car driving around or living in a derelict building somehow, there are laws that most countries that stop you from doing that. In the UK, you have a right to a house over your head. You have a right to a room, and people get housed at great cost by the state. But if they want to live in a tree house, they get busted for it. And the only alternative to a, approved standard living building is a cardboard box on the street. There's nothing in between. And it's a real sort of void in our housing stock, that kind of attitude. And there's this ownership. There's, I don't know, you can't actually own a piece of land. It doesn't make sense, because how far down do you go into the earth? How high up do you go? I mean, you can own the right to use a bit of land, and many people have established that right by farming it, by producing it, by building something on it. But when you're not doing that, and you're somewhere else and it's empty, nothing is happening to it, you can't really say you own it. And we had a horrible thing happen in Britain with the enclosure acts of the commons. There was, like, for thousands of years, there was common land that people grazed their animals on, their crops they used, and it was common land. And in the 18th and 19th centuries, the Enclosures Act came in, and it was where suddenly this land was all taken by the government. I mean, there was a huge outcry over it, and given to wealthy landowners who were like the corporations of their day, if you like, lobbying the government to make these rules, convincing MPs who were also landowners that this was in the best interest of the public somehow. But it was, for hundreds of years, this land had existed for the people, and landowners couldn't take it over. They didn't have the firepower to go in, or the moral power to go in and take this land away from the common man. But again, the state, with its armies, its bureaucrats, and its ability to write a law saying, okay, this is now the law, you have to comply with it, they got away with it. And it was a terrible, theft of people's rights and freedom to live off the land.
Yeah. And I mean, we saw that here in the United States with the Native Americans and what happened.
Yeah. I mean, taking their land and saying, this is now our property. I've sold it to somebody. You've got to get off of it. I mean, what an alien concept. How strange thing to be able to do. I mean, discovering America like nobody had ever discovered it, like nobody was living there.
Yeah.
I
like the saying, what was it? Columbus Day is the day the Native Americans discovered Columbus,
Yeah.
And it goes even deeper than that. I mean, we're seeing it right now in Arizona with the U.S. government federalizing the water table underneath the Hopi Reservation and claiming ownership of it. And it goes on with resources and, what's next? The air,
Yeah, well, you don't own the land under your home in most parts of Great Britain. So if somebody finds, minerals under your house, they have the right to go and dig under there and pull it up. And, we have fracking has just landed on our shores. And,
oh, Lord, your turn now.
Usually subsidized by the government, encouraging people to come in and frack. And of course, there's a whole anti-fracking protest going on. The public are getting aware of what's going on. England's, probably about as big as Arkansas, with nearly 60 million people in it.
Right.
We just really can't. It's terrible what gets done.
And just the idea, we see it all the time on Facebook, that meme that's going around that says, Earth, the only place you're born to pay rent just to exist.
Yeah.
Again, it comes from the idea of political power and government, and this implemented. And I don't even want to say it's self-implemented, but it is definitely through our compliance that we give it any type of legitimacy.
Yeah.
And that's something that we need to begin to think about.
The government lives because we believe that we need them. We believe they're essential, and that's their basic whole grip on power. I mean, they're small compared to, as I mentioned before, all those wonderful things from cars to ballpoint pens to smartphones. That's all stuff we do. We don't need them for that. And if you took them out of the picture, I don't think Mexico or Canada would invade. I don't think North Korea would bomb us. If we got out of the Middle East, we're not going to have, those terrorists coming over and blowing our buildings up. Do we need this, hundreds of bases in nations all over the world in America? It's a con. It's a con.
Yeah, it is. It
and
truly is.
People are buying into it, and I'm really thrilled to hear about the protest against the NSA. I hope that gets somewhere. And I was also really thrilled to hear recently, after decades of wringing my hands over this drug violence going on in Mexico and the drug cartels, which is all one of the consequences of having drugs illegal. But, the horrible things and the beheadings and stuff that was going on. And then it was the last week or two, the vigilantes, which is a bad word, we think,
right,
had said it got so bad in, let's see, where was it? In this one province of Mexico, Michoacan, the people rose up, and vigilante groups numbered up to 20,000 men just went into these cities and kicked out the Knights Templar cartel that had been really ruining their lives, extorting money from local businesses, seizing young girls off the streets. And the people finally said, we can't, the government with all their military, all their armaments could never do anything. They could never get rid of these drug cartels. The people rose up and they did it. They kicked them out. They got them on the run. And the government initially was going to say, we've got to stop this vigilance. We can't have people taking these matters into their own hands. And then they realized, actually, we better go in and support them. And now they're registering them and stuff. But it shouldn't have to get so bad before people say, no, we've got to do something ourselves about this. And
it all comes back to what we were talking about earlier is, let me do what I need to do or what I want to do. If I'm not hurting anybody else, what business is it of yours?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We have a saying, harm none, do what you will. I think that should be the only law.
Yeah, as long as you're not screwing anybody else up.
If you're not hurting anybody, do whatever you want.
What you do with your head and your body and your house and what you eat and how you want to treat your illnesses is up to you. If I want to, go to some guy who swallows a goldfish to get rid of my chest infection, well, that's kind of stupid, but I want the right to do that.
Right. It's not hurting anybody,
Except the goldfish.
Poor goldfish, but there would be a metaphysical argument to that the goldfish incarnated for your remedy. So
oh, that's okay then, but I'm still not going to try it.
All right. Let's talk about we have about 10 minutes left, and let's talk about your chapter, Emptying the Corridors of Power. And I love this quote from P.J. O'Rourke: "The mystery of government is not how Washington works, but how to make it stop." That's brilliant. What is the situation now? Are we at a point now where I would say that my personal agenda is to create a community, to create alternative ways of living, to create a new paradigm that makes government obsolete. But is that the way to go? What are your thoughts on changing this whole structure?
Well, the first and most important thing is to stop thinking that the state, the coercive state, is going to get things right, is going to get, bring us to full employment and healthy, good health and good food and a safe environment and all the things we kind of think that they are going to do, whereas in fact, as I explain in my book, most of the problems we have are caused by the state in the first place. And once we stop thinking they're going to sort it out if we lobby them hard enough and have enough numbers on the petitions, once we stop thinking that way, then we start thinking, okay, well, how are we going to do it? How are we going to, manage ourselves in a sustainable way? Because they aren't going to do it. And then we get groups and associations, we get alternative digital currencies emerge. People are very, very clever. I mean, we are basically community animals. We've got much more in common with the wildebeest than the lion. And we're community animals, and we're really smart. We've got a lot of intelligence, and we can write things, and we can share knowledge and information and communicate with each other. And this is really the only way to go. And as we expect less from government, there will be a reduction of government. Emptying the corridors of power, that chapter, it was a kind of whimsical idea, but also a powerful idea. And this was to form it was the One Less Party. I actually did this, and I ran somebody for Parliament in the UK. They didn't win the election, but and it was to just create one less politician, to create a signal, and the candidates signed an oath, an actually legally binding oath, that if elected, they would serve none of the functions of being an MP. They wouldn't take their seat in Parliament. They wouldn't take any salary. They wouldn't employ anybody. They would promise not to misrepresent you, because they're not going to represent you. It would be one less politician, and it's based on the premise politicians are the problem, and to empty a seat in the Parliament or in the Senate without killing somebody, I think would send a shockwave across the world, and perhaps get these guys looking for real jobs instead of the work they're doing today. But as I said, that's a whimsical idea which would get a signal across, and I think realizing that we are much better at being responsible for ourselves and not yielding that responsibility to the government is the first step in the process. Because it removes their validity, the reason for them being there. And that's why they keep us in fear. Fear is so important. I mean, the American government was shitting itself when the Cold War ended. Because, how are we going to justify our existence? And then as the war on terrorism was stirred up and fed by us, fine, sigh of relief. Okay, we can continue stealing freedoms. We can take more money. We can apply the fist harder, read everybody's emails, see what they're surfing on the web. Appalling stuff they are able to do by keeping us fearful. If we let go of that fear, let go of the expectations that they need to protect us and safeguard our lives, that takes the power away from them. And the rest, I don't know what the natural process is that reduces them as a result, but I hope to live to see the day.
Yeah, as do I. I can't help but think about the idea of the masses coming to a place where we are not motivated by fear or feeding the fear. I mean, we see it every day in the TV shows, in the news, and the celebrity worship and whatnot. It's constantly a fear-based reaction that seems to be happening, and again, that legitimizes the need for such a control mechanism as the current modern day version of what government is. And,
yeah,
no,
and
go on.
A lot of that is underlined by all the Hollywood movies coming out. You know, these post apocalypse sort of disaster movies where people are running around with guns, killing each other. There's horrible people turned against each other, and yet when you have these disasters going on, we see people getting together and helping each other out, supporting each other. We've got flooding in the UK at the moment. A large part of England is underwater, and people are looking after each other. When you had Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast, it was the Occupy movement. We're in the front line of distributing food and blankets to the people who'd lost their homes.
Yeah.
It's what people do. Even after Baghdad after Operation Shock and Awe, where the U.S. forces spent a couple of weeks destroying the infrastructure, the water system, the power, the communication. They were just destroying the whole infrastructure. I guess they could go in and take all the oil money to build it back up again. But within a week of that, life got back to semi-normal. People figured out how to get around all this destruction, how to support each other and work together. That's what people do. They don't pull out their guns and start shooting each other to steal food. It's this terrible attitude we have.
You are so right. And I was actually going to bring that up before the end of the show, how disaster and whatnot brings us together. There's again, the Facebook meme. I'm an optimist, meaning I know the end is coming, but it's going to be okay.
I love that word.
I love that one. Yeah, I am an
optimist.
I'm an apocalyptimist. And the reality of it is that it's not what we're being told. And the reality of it is that a lot of the alternative media make the opposite presumption, saying that you need to collect your guns, you need to protect yourself when things go bad, and the Alex Joneses of the world and whatnot. Do you have your guns? Are you going to protect your food and whatnot? And I was in South Florida during Hurricane Wilma, where, half of the state was shut down. There was no food, there was no water, there was no gasoline, there was no electricity. And people became friends, people that never knew each other. We'd start a charcoal grill, and people from around the neighborhood would start throwing meat on it, feeding the whole block,
That's beautiful.
And you don't see this mythology, this like right-wing conspiracy of, where, the end is coming and you need a gun. I really do feel it. And don't get me wrong. I'm sure there was burglaries or whatnot. There's going to be greedy, angry people out there. Of course, that's human nature. But all in all, you would see more people coming together. Sadly, I will say I wanted to make a footnote on the idea of Occupy Sandy. What was it? I think it was 2 months into the situation there. The New York mayor came in and shut him down. Because they didn't have the right permit,
Yeah. Oh,
you don't have a permit to help people. How dare you help people?
Well, I know. It's people are great. We're really good at this, and there are, of course, rogues and villains. There are bad people,
of course,
and we just have to let go of a system in which the bad people rise to the top. And have these crazy ideas like you can't be helpful unless you have a permit. That's our job, and you really do. It's so many. Well, you can see the appeal because you have the opportunity to dip into everybody's pockets and take money out, and do what you like with it. Now, most people who have those inclinations have to pull out a knife or a gun or a fist, risk getting damaged themselves, and they can only do one person at a time to take that money out of their pockets. So, the idea of being able to do this without having to pull out a knife appeals to that sort of person. Yeah. And that sort of person does very often percolate to the top. And there's nothing to stop them.
Nothing yet.
Did you ever see that list of all the crimes that congressmen have?
Sure.
The crime sheet of how many of them have been busted for embezzlement, for theft, for various offenses. It's quite appalling because you read this whole list and you say, well, who are these people? These are the members of the American Congress.
Absolutely. Well, Gregory, we need to wrap things up. We got about 30 seconds left. I can't believe how quickly today's show went by. I want to thank you so much for joining us, and tell everybody where they can find your book and when's the print version coming out. Well,
my book is print version is coming out at the beginning of April.
Wonderful.
The digital version is online now. It's just under $2. That's really cheap, and I hope it stays that price when the print version comes out. It's called The State is Out of Date. You can Google that. You'll get to my website for the book. You'll
5 more seconds.
To the book.
Not anymore.
Okay.
I will post all the links on the archive. Thank you very much, Gregory. I appreciate you joining us today, and thank you everyone for listening.
All right. Thank you. It's been great to be here.
There is no denying the world is awakening. We see it in the global uprisings and demonstrations of the people around the planet and the new way of thinking and living that is arising naturally within each one of us and our communities. I have been a major player in this global shift and movement for over 20 years and have helped tens of thousands of people around the world change their lives and find their voice in order to help create the paradigm change we so desperately need. Join me here at Revolution Radio on the Just Bernard Show every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time for 2 hours of powerful interviews and discussion with some of the most influential visionaries of consciousness, alternative media, and suppressed knowledge. We promise to reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience.